Okay, welcome to today's panel, Embracing Disruption and Harnessing Technology for the Future of Cities. I'm Mike Burke, the Chairman and CEO of AECOM, and AECOM designs, builds, finance, and operates infrastructure assets around the world. And we have the great fortune of shaping some of the skylines of some of the most wonderful cities in the world. And a big part of our business is reimagining what cities are going to look like sometimes 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And as we start to imagine cities, we are in the midst of an incredible demographic shift around the world. We are in the midst of the urbanization of the world. And in 2008 was the first year that the world had more than 50% of our population living in an urban environment versus a rural environment. Today, that stands at 54%. And currently, the United Nations is estimating that 2.5 billion additional people will move into the urban environment by the year 2050. And we all know that the current state of the infrastructure around the world is already crumbling, it's already in disrepair, and you can only imagine the burdens that are going to be placed on infrastructure with 2.5 billion additional people moving into those cities. So we know we have a great demand for infrastructure. We're not quite sure how we're going to pay for it. Current estimates are that it's going to cost in excess of $50 trillion to bring infrastructure up to the current state up to a state that could handle 2.5 billion additional people. So that's the context for our panel discussion today. How do we think about the challenges in front of us on infrastructure? How do we bring new technologies like Hyperloop? How do we involve the shared economy of Uber, of WeWorks? And how do we bring all that together, and how do we pay for it? How do we think about what the next 50 or 100 years is going to look like in the major urban markets of the world as we bring together infrastructure, housing, and mobility? And then how will we pay for it is the big challenge. So the panel that we have here today represents people from traditional infrastructure sectors, from government, from the shared economy, from innovators, pioneers in new technologies, to think about what the future looks like in major cities around the world and bring it all together. So let me introduce our panel today. First of all, to my left, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, one of the world's great cities and AECOM's hometown, my hometown. And Mayor Garcetti.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Garcetti has become known for focusing on infrastructure and embracing technological change and innovation, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Next up on the panel, David Plouffe, all the way to the left, Chief Advisor and Board Member of Uber. We've all seen the meteoric rise of Uber over the past few years. They're now in 400 cities. They're in 68 countries around the world. They've now provided over 1 billion rides in Uber. And in today's election season, it's worth noting that David is the architect of probably one of the most famous and successful presidential campaigns ever for Barack Obama in 2008. I suspect there's a few people that could have used your help this election cycle. And then no panel would be complete in my mind without a rocket scientist, of course. And so we have our very own rocket scientist, Brogan, BamBrogan, down to my right here. Brogan was instrumental in the design of this first SpaceX rocket, and now he's taken that innovation and started an entirely new mode of transportation called Hyperloop Technologies. He's the founder and chief technology officer of Hyperloop Technologies, and we look forward to hearing more about that today. Immediately to my right, Dale Bonner, Executive Chairman of Plenary Concessions. Plenary finances infrastructure projects around the world, so he's going to tell us how we're going to pay for all of this. But Plenary has financed 34 projects with a total capital expenditure of over $21 billion around the world. And prior to that, Dale was the California Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing, so he's seen how all of this comes together. And then last is Artie Menson, president of WeWork, the shared office space, a pioneer in shared economy for office space, now branching out into shared economy as it relates to housing. They're, of course, one of the darling startups, one of the unicorns that had a recent valuation in excess of $15 billion in just 4 short years of time. So we have a panel here to hopefully address all of these issues and start to reimagine the future. So I'd like to start with the first question for Mayor Garcetti. Mayor, you've talked about the decade of reimagining Los Angeles, and we've heard you talk a lot about how we're going to reimagine the city and the challenges we have with infrastructure, and your progressive approach to focusing on innovation and new technologies and thinking well ahead of the current problems. You've also been an advocate for special use tax measures like Measure R, hopefully Measure R2 that'll produce $120 billion of funds for transportation here in Los Angeles, what will become the largest public infrastructure works program in the entire United States. So as you think about all of that and think about the future of Los Angeles and our infrastructure, taking into account the shared economy and taking into account the new technologies, what does it all look like?
Well, thank you, Mike, and welcome, everybody. It's great to always have Milken here in Los Angeles and for so many people to be visiting this incredible metropolis. And I hope you get time to get away as well from the conference to see what's happening here in LA. You know, when I became mayor a little less than 3 years ago, I looked at that urban landscape. We knew the statistics of the demographic change. But I also saw this kind of inflection point in our technology companies, technological innovation, on infrastructure, on lifestyle, on commerce, and realized that, you know, cities were taking maybe 3 different approaches. One of them was future resisting. Oh, let's keep the Ubers out. Let's not have, you know, any of this shared economy come inside, build a wall around a city. You had the kind of future accepting cities who said, okay, well, it's going to happen. Let's figure out a way, you know, just to kind of sit back and watch it. You can't resist change. And then there wasn't a lot in a third category that I saw, which was kind of future guiding, which isn't scared of change, but it isn't passive about it either, and plays kind of a partnership where I think a lot of times great companies come forward, they're like, we're going to change the world and just get out of our way, government. Other times government overregulates and gets in the way of innovation. But there's a good marriage somewhere in between that, where we play our role on the physical infrastructure and building up kind of the platform for innovation that can bring prosperity to a city like Los Angeles. So what does that mean here? Well, in 3 short years, we've tried to open up literally the government and the city of LA as a platform for innovation to help a Hyperloop get here, be here, stay here, as we rethink in a town that has the twin ports of San Pedro Bay, LA, and Long Beach ports are responsible for 1 out of 51 jobs in America, 1 out of 9 here, and 43% of all the goods that we buy that come by sea. An airport that's the #1 origination and destination airport in the world now. So we're 5th in airport traffic, but the top 4 only get higher because they have hub travel and people go through that town but never actually see it. The largest municipal utility, et cetera. And we looked for the ways that we could be there when people wanted to do something cool and get out of the way when they wanted us to be gone. And we're usually the opposite. We're usually in your way when we don't want you to be, and we're nowhere to be found when you need a little bit of help. So what does that look like? It was going to companies like Waze, you know, who, with Google, who are, we're the #1 Waze users, of course, in the country, #2 in the world. But there was never been a relationship with a city of sharing data. So we share data so Waze users can tell us why those streets have slowed down. There's a branch that fell, and we can get our city crews out hours quicker to clear that out. But we can also push information to them if there's an Amber Alert, let's say, of something dangerous going on in the city, and Waze drivers can become part of our public safety infrastructure. We're building things like partnering with Xerox, a Go LA app, which you go from point A to point B, you put where you are and where you want to go. It tells you the greenest, the cheapest, and the quickest ways to get around. You can put a value on, well, how green do you want to be? How cheap do you want to be? How quick do you need to be? And it will tell you the best way, integrating between shared bikes, Uber and Lyft, taxis, buses, rail, shared cars, et cetera, how to get from point A to point B. So here in Los Angeles, we're trying to help guide companies to be future embracing and guiding, to say, hey, think about X, Y, Z, while we fully are behind what you are doing. And in fact, this is what we bring to the table. And I think in Los Angeles, you're seeing the fruition of that. You know, unemployment cut in half, the fastest pace in the country of any big city. Our unemployment fell by 28% this past year. More tech jobs in LA than any county in America now, more green jobs than anywhere, more manufacturing jobs than anywhere, more trade jobs than anywhere. And as such, we hope we can kind of be that engine of innovation and demographically be a picture of the way the world looks today and what America will look like tomorrow, and most importantly, what a government should look like. Helping where you can, assisting, offering innovation, offering a platform, and then getting out of the way for the private sector to do what it does best.
Great. So, as we think about innovation, obviously the shared economy has played an increasing role in cities around the country. But David, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. And what is the shared economy as it relates to Uber? What does it look and feel like as we start to think more longer term? We know what it looks and feels like today. But what does it look and feel like longer term, and how does it integrate with traditional infrastructure? Before we get on to the Hyperloop, the futuristic stuff, how does Uber today think about its relationship with traditional infrastructure, whether it be the airports or any other mode? And then how do we think about the next evolution of technology and autonomous cars as it relates to Uber and shared automobiles?
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I think what's fascinating is Uber and Lyft are often described as disruptive companies. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it from a market standpoint, we're more additive than disruptive. So as it turns out, and our founders would be the first ones to tell you, they had an idea the market was this large. So most people who use Uber, the vast majority of people, aren't using us instead of a taxi. They're using us instead of using their personal car. So as it turns out, there was a whole intermobility story. Public transportation, bike sharing, personal car use, pedestrian, but the ability to press a button and get a ride in 3 minutes has a pretty profound impact. So people aren't using our platform for everything. In fact, 50% of Uber rides are one way. So they're using us one way, taxi the other way, maybe public transportation. But it allows people to make a decision, maybe not to buy a car, which is what more and more millennials are desirous of. I mean, the stat you talked about, so 2.5 billion more people means 2 out of every 3 people by 2050 living in a city. So you've got a historic epic migration into cities that are already choked. So here in LA, the average commuter spends 80 hours a year commuting. 81% of downtown LA is comprised of parking spots. So you get to a point where you've got more people not driving themselves. And the thing we're most excited about in the company is something called Uber Pool, which is carpooling, which is instead of getting in the back of a Toyota Prius by yourself, you're sharing it with someone else. And 25% of the people who use Uber today in LA use Uber Pool for something that wasn't even around a year ago. 50% in San Francisco. So it's an interesting transition to the autonomous future. People are opting to share rides. Younger people do it for a few reasons in particular. It's cheaper, it's about half price, lowest cost Uber. They believe they're doing something good for their environment, and they also enjoy the social dynamic. So the only thing until we get to a full autonomous future that has any chance of bending the curve in terms of congestion and emissions is having fewer people driving their cars and more people in the cars on the road. And so that's what we see. So from a mobility standpoint, and there's something fascinating happening with younger people. So we know that a lot of millennials aren't interested in buying a car. They want to live in We Live or work in WeWork. But the next generation, Generation Z, they don't even want to get a license. Okay? And I think cities have to understand this. I mean, the construction requirements around parking spots need to change. How do we reclaim some of that parking space for better use? So there's something pretty, I mean, think about it. Uber didn't even exist 5.5 years ago. And you're already seeing this effect. So in the next 5 or 6 years, you're going to see, I think, a lot more people utilizing services like ours, more and more of them using carpooling. And that has a profound impact in terms of things like congestion. And again, I think that is an interesting bridge to the day when we have autonomous vehicles on scale in most major U.S. cities.
Mm-hmm. So as you think about autonomous vehicles, I'd be interested in your point of view and the mayor's point of view on who's going to own the autonomous vehicles. Will they be individually owned, or will they be owned by a public entity, much like buses are owned today? And we certainly saw right here in Beverly Hills, they are pursuing a plan to own autonomous taxis, where the city would own the autonomous taxis. Do you have a point of view, or are you agnostic on the ownership model for the cars?
Well, I think, we really are in our infancy in terms of firmly answering questions like, I think, the global community, not just companies like ours. I think it's important to step back and say, why is this important, though? 1.3 million people die every year in car crashes. Twice the number of people who died on D-Day, more people than die of breast cancer. Most estimates say that could be dropped by 90%. Transportation becomes something that costs a few cents a mile. By the time it happens on scale, those will be emissions-free vehicles. They will be maybe no stoplights. Parking will be entirely different in cities. So I think, what's interesting, and I'm learning a lot about this as I left government to come into a company like this, but you think about the burden of car ownership on lower income people. It's one of the most important, in a punitive way, expenses that they have. But it's also been determined to be, what's the number one cause of people staying trapped in poverty? It's actually not crime rates. It's not school rates. It's the inaccessibility and the cost of transportation. So where I think our big value proposition is, we're thrilled to provide transportation from the Beverly Hills Hilton and in Brentwood, but it's in South LA, it's in the south side of Chicago, it's in Anacostia, places that were transportation deserts. So the core offering that we're offering is already making a difference. But you think about a day when that becomes even more inexpensive, it's going to have profound economic impact, not just mobility impact.
Yeah.
On the same thing, I think, cities need land. I think the housing crises that we have in our major American cities, the lack of green space, the need for companies to locate and to expand, we need land. And to David's point that downtown LA is 81% parking space, to the stats that I think most of us know, average car doesn't move 95% of the time. The fuel that we use today, only 3% of it drives the wheels. And even at peak traffic, which is only about 5% of a day, only 10% of the roads actually have a car on them. Means that we suddenly can free up a lot of land that allows us to bring down the price of land, which allows us to confront things like the housing crises that we see in major American cities around the West Coast and places like Washington, D.C., where the latest study that just came out from Trulio that was, the City Lab did an interesting article on, Richard Florida wrote about, is showing how millennials are leaving 50% from these cities because they can't see a future here. I think also, as we look at it from an urban planning perspective, the ability, to your question, I don't think it'll be, there's two different strains. There's the car companies who are saying individuals are still going to want to buy these, and then there's the Googles of the world and maybe even Ubers who are saying it's a commodity. I went to France, and some of you have seen the electric cars that they have there that are shared electric cars. You can dial up, take one out, and go. The company that builds those, they say, we are not a car company. We're providing a service. The car is only the throughput. And I think owning a car is a pain in the butt. I mean, long term, it's really nice and sexy when you get it off the lot. But then all of a sudden, when you got to deal with the accidents, you got to deal with the insurance, you got to deal with the maintenance of it, you got to wash it. I think long term, if people knew they could get more quickly, and I was talking to a CEO last night who said, I love having my life back. I get so much work done now as I go to and from where I need to go. And I didn't do that. So we love in LA this idea we're going to have freedom, trapped in a car, moving at 3 miles an hour. That's not freedom. And I think the moment that a new generation shows us differently, the way it isn't just about transportation, it's going to free up the way we do urban planning.
Well, that's a great segue. Let's go from moving at 3 miles an hour, as you say, to moving at 800 miles an hour.
That was nicely done.
You set me up well. Brogan, we've all heard about Hyperloop. Some might say the hype of Hyperloop. It's a lot of excitement, moving people at 800 miles an hour in a vacuum tube. Sounds exciting. Tell us a little bit about it, and how real is it to solve some of these challenges that we have? We heard David talk about mobility being important to bring people out of poverty. How real is the Hyperloop? How soon can we see it? And what is the impact on some of these challenges that we have?
All good questions. First of all, thanks for having me. Great panel. Hyperloop can move 800 miles an hour, but it doesn't have to. Just to give a little rundown for anyone that isn't extremely familiar, we're an integrated transportation infrastructure system, so we're talking about physically building a tube between two destinations, controlling the environment in that tube, and then sending things not only very fast, which is what kind of gets all the press, but really a lot of the other elements we're really excited about delivering, which is extremely safe, fully green, very energy efficient, fully autonomous, unrestricted of right-of-way, weatherproof. So there's this full slate of opportunities that we think this technology can bring. And as to how real it is, well, I do want to point out that this was first kind of made public just about 3 years ago by Elon Musk. He said, here's this great idea, someone go do it. So we took that, we being our company, and we said, okay, that's a great system-level architecture. We love all the things that we can do, but let's just break it down and start over. So we took that idea and we said, okay, if we can bring real value with all these kind of opportunities, let's do that for freight and for passengers, and let's develop a whole product matrix of things we can deliver. So right now as a company, we're building real hardware. We're headquartered in downtown LA, which is super important to us. We're in Los Angeles on purpose. There's a real thing happening here. I think Paris in the 50s, New York in the 80s, and Los Angeles right now, this is just the absolute place where the greatest minds are coming together, and we can just feel it. It's just in the air, and everyone's additive to everyone else. So super excited to be in LA, really thankful. And no accident, we can tap into USC, Caltech, UCLA, and all the great other history of hardware innovation that's gone all the way back for 100 years in the aerospace industry. So we're in LA, we've got about 150 people now, and we're building real hardware. So a lot of people, and rightly so, still think this is a science fiction idea, but actually we're going to have a full-scale, full-speed prototype running by the end of this year. So we're talking about building real hardware, and it's really exciting. So as we do this, our team, we fully understand that Hyperloop is real. We're innovating not to make it work. We could make Hyperloop work today, last year, but there's a lot of things happening collectively with information technology that's available, with material science, with the great work that AECOM does. You think about advanced materials, 3D printing concrete. All these things are making Hyperloop cost effective. It's not about building Hyperloop, but at $200 million a mile, it doesn't really add value to the system. So we think we can deploy this technology extremely cost effectively, and we're kind of working with the great partners right now to do that. So if we think about now adding cost effective to that other list of opportunities, we really think we can deliver a lot of value. We think regional connector is going to be a really good opportunity. Enabling workforce mobility is going to be a really good opportunity. Resetting some land values could be a really good opportunity where you could have a suburb that's effectively 30 or 40 miles out of town that now connects into Union Station in just 6 minutes of elevator ride. Another thing I really like to point out is Hyperloop is capable of going fast. It does not have to. We are a full child-friendly, grandmother-friendly, pet-friendly experience. We're an elevator. So you think about bringing that, and then you also think about the freight opportunities. If you can take the existing ports, which are already doing so much work, and add efficiency to those ports by having a high-speed connector to an inland intermodal, now you can maybe double the efficiency of that same port. Also making it easier on the local community without the pollution, being unrestricted of right-of-way, so maybe you have less trucks on the road. And really, we're just starting to think about, being a part of this panel is really what I want to do, is like, okay, now you have this tool in your chest. How do you use it to really bring the best value to the citizens of this community?
So, Brogan, a couple months ago, I was in your office and we were talking about the perception among most people that it's going to be a passenger movement, and you correctly pointed out that it'll probably more likely to be early on be moving freight here in the U.S., moving people outside the U.S., and then, of course, it'll all level out. But one of the things we talked about was some of the projects outside the U.S. that you're focused on. We were talking about the United Arab Emirates in particular, and one of the distinguishing factors that you quickly pointed out to me there was the fact that you had two cities, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, that were fairly far apart, moving people rapidly between those two cities, a lot of open space. But the key differentiator was they had a monarchy. And monarchies don't have to deal with a lot of regulation. And so how are you thinking about places like Emirates, where you have very little regulation and ease of implementation, versus big, complicated metropolitan markets where you not only have city regulation, but you have multiple cities and counties and states and federal government? How do you think that will either accelerate or inhibit the development of Hyperloop?
Great question. First of all, we love regulation. I love regulation. It's the reason we can sit in this tent and not feel like it's going to crash down on us because someone did their homework and said this is the right way to do it. What we want is we just want the right regulation for Hyperloop. We don't want an add-on, ad hoc combination of other forms of transportation that are cut and pasted. So we're looking for, and we're starting to have these conversations with people that are as innovative on the regulatory side as we are on the technology side. And there is precedent. The FAA, the things that they did in the 50s and 60s were extraordinarily innovative. And even in the 70s, the way they enabled FedEx by changing their regulations to enable that private enterprise to flourish, certainly high-speed rail. And then we're looking at all forms of transportation regulation. So we know we can deliver the safest system, and we're happy to have the regulation to back that up from a government side.
Great. So one of the things that we've heard people talk about is if we're going to use Hyperloop to move people, we also have something that may or may not be competing here in California, the much discussed high-speed rail. And so Dale, from your days as the California Secretary of Transportation, you had a point of view on high-speed rail. And do you think that high-speed rail is something that is competing with Hyperloop? Is it going to be one or the other? Are they mutually exclusive, or can they operate together to solve some of these challenges we have?
Yeah, I appreciate it. First, let me say I appreciate being here. Great conversation, and we're pleased to be headquartered here in Los Angeles, along with first world-class firms like AECOM and Hyperloop as well. I think at one level we need it all. So when you think about the first point that you made in terms of the projected growth in population, I think I heard somewhere, Mr. Mayor, that here in Los Angeles, 10, 20 years from now, you'll have something like the equivalent of the city of Chicago kind of dropped on top of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And so, when you look at it from that standpoint, you can't wait until it's painfully clear that you really need something before you start doing it, right? So when especially these big, complicated projects like Hyperloop or high-speed rail, which will be many more times expensive and much more complicated to build if you wait so long until it's absolutely clear. So I'm kind of in the camp that says at some level you need all of it, or at least all of what's on the table today. It's unfortunate that there's such a tremendous lag time between the decision to do something and when you can actually deliver it. We were talking earlier about my experience in the early 90s when we set up the High-Speed Rail Commission, and how surprised I was to come back to government some 15 years later to find out that it was still a 3-person commission in a cubicle, and then here we are today, we're still trying to figure out just how to build it. So somewhere along the lines, we have to kind of figure out how to take these large-scale projects from concept to reality. But when I don't really see the systems as competing. I see them as part of this broader overarching conversation about mobility as a service. Whereas, as the mayor described, you were speaking to it at the last mile kind of concept, and that's what I would say to you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, a lot of this comes to your shoulders because whether it's Hyperloop, whether it's high-speed rail, whether it's the private transportation companies, services, these have tremendous impacts for the first and last mile of the system. Because not many people are going to use them if they can't really get from their home or to their office or wherever they're going. And lastly, I would say that when you think about the social benefits, tremendous social benefits to the kind of opportunity that you have with Hyperloop or high-speed rail, or even with Uber and car services. But all of the social benefits are not necessarily positive, at least for the current construct, because in some cases, what you're going to have, if you have fewer people driving, you'll have fewer vehicle registration fees and license fees. If you have fewer people parking, you have fewer parking tickets and parking fees and the like. So what it means is, at the same time that government is trying to explore to do new things, you are at some level eroding or at least compromising the revenue base that you have to continue to invest in infrastructure now today. So we need to think not only about modernizing and innovating for the physical assets, but we also need to innovate and modernize the financing and funding systems that we have to pay for all of this, because otherwise, too many of these projects will remain a concept on a drawing board.
So, Dale, obviously you're involved in the private sector funding of some of these large infrastructure projects, and we've seen the world change quite a bit from a entirely public-funded project through general funds, moving to some specific funds like Measure R here in California, now to the private sector of P3 is stepping up and deploying massive amounts of capital. Do you think that trend will continue with a combination of a partnership between the private sector and the public sector to bring money not only to traditional infrastructure projects, but bringing it to projects like Hyperloop or bringing it to projects like a co-ownership model of autonomous cars? Do you see it evolving in that direction?
I certainly see now the capacity and willingness to innovate on just the basic premise of public-private partnerships. You know, that started in around other parts of the world many years ago, but even what they were doing in Europe 20, 25 years ago, and even here in the U.S. in the early 90s, is different from what's being done today. You know, before it was either or in terms of who is sharing the risk of both the technology or the financing. Today, it is much more of a sharing of the risk. You know, there's a little more balanced allocation of risk. And I think that's very germane here, because if the mayor came to us and said, hey, would you retrofit the entire city of Los Angeles to accommodate connected cars or automated? The private sector, I think, could step up and deliver a fairly innovative solution. There would have to be a conversation then about how the risk of not only the technology risk, but the liability risk and other forms of risk would need to be shared. So I think that what the private sector is saying, when you look at the kind of innovation that's bookending this panel, Uber on one side and Hyperloop on the other, is tremendous capacity for innovation. But what we've got to have now is the government partnership. And it's not simply the red tape conversation that we've had historically. It's really government has got to participate in thinking through the long-term implications. And I would close with this metric. And I was reading as I was preparing for the conversation today, and the National League of Cities just put out a report a few months ago, rightly, I think, pointing out that cities are at the forefront of this, and the cities are kind of the go-to government entity of the future. I agree with that. Unfortunately, they looked at the long-term planning documents of about 68 of the largest jurisdictions in the country. And what they found was only 6% of government agencies have any conversation about Uber or Lyft or any of the modern technologies that we're talking about, and about 3% have anything really meaningful to say about. Hopefully, Los Angeles is in the 3 or 6%. But the point is that that most governments are kind of aware of and they're focused on the safety and some of the top line issues, but we haven't yet seen the kind of leadership that's gotten us really down to the practical point of how do we really operationalize all this.
So before we move to shared office and housing, Mayor Garcetti, I'd like to hear your thoughts on we have a lot of private sector people here in the room. We've got a lot of innovators in the room. What could the private sector be doing to ensure that we bring more innovation to the government and our governmental agencies accept that innovation with wide open arms? And I know here in Los Angeles, you've been very progressive on that front of encouraging innovation and bringing innovation to City Hall and all of your agencies. But what could the private sector do, or what advice do you have for other cities that may not be as progressive?
Well, I would say three things from a leadership perspective. I think mayors and city leaders need to do the following. One is open up the data that we have. We have some of the most robust data, the most important things that can help push innovation out. For instance, our ATSAC system, which is our automated traffic system. Yes, we have one for those who are in Los Angeles. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Was created for the 1984 Olympics, and it's incredibly rich data. We were actually throwing it away. We weren't even archiving it, and we weren't sharing it. When I came in, we went from unranked in terms of open data to now ranked #1 in the country for what we do. And sometimes we get criticized because the data shows that we're doing something poorly, but it leads to innovation and changing that. So first and foremost, open up government, open up your data, measure, collect, and share that. Second, offer your city as a platform. So for instance, I think of Cargomatic, a company that's kind of like, we sometimes say the Uber of logistics. It matches truck drivers with the cargo containers coming off of ships. Well, the system for lining people up, burning their diesel fuel, trying to figure out where the can that they need to put on the back of their truck is highly inefficient. And when we learned that they were also LA-based, we said, you've got this port in your backyard, start testing it here, and then use that as a platform to market your product to places like Singapore and Shanghai, et cetera. And then third, look to the private sector to actually do some of the work of government. Why is it in this more capitalist society, country, the quote-unquote more socialist ones, places like European countries or Canada, have figured out P3s so much better than we have. And so we've made a huge change, and Los Angeles is leading the way, not just becoming the infrastructure capital with $15 billion at the airport, $2.5 billion at the port, and what will hopefully be over $120 billion in transportation. But we've also opened up at the airport and at the MTA the partnership. So Phil Washington, who used to run Denver's MTA, recruited him to come out here. He started about a year ago. They just finished the largest non-toll road P3 in the country by connecting Denver City with the airport. And that was finally a success, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to recruit him out here. He has an Office of Extraordinary Partnerships, which is a fancy way of saying, come pitch us. Instead of waiting for us to design a request for proposals, we know how to do it. We're saying, we've got a problem to solve, come pitch us. And if you pitch us and give us a proposal, we can start talking to you and go around what takes years and is usually outdated by the time we do a traditional one. So bring in the private sector for innovation to do the work, offer yourself as a platform, and share your data, because you never know where the innovation is going to come from.
Fantastic. So why don't we move to Artie? And Artie, you know, you've heard some of the challenges we're talking about from a transportation infrastructure perspective, and you heard the mayor mention the shortage of housing that we're going to have if we've got to move 2.5 billion people into the cities. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on how the shared office and living space economy is going to impact the way we think about transportation infrastructure in major metropolitan markets. But before you do that, it might be helpful for you to tell us a little bit about what WeWork does, what WeLive does, the new move. And in preparing for this panel, I was trying to follow what you were doing, and it kept changing every day, from opening, I think, in Berlin this morning, opening in Seoul yesterday, yesterday morning in Washington, D.C. I couldn't keep track. Every time I refreshed the news feed, you were opening a new operation somewhere. But please tell us a little bit about WeWork and WeLive.
And thanks for having me. And maybe I'd do a show of hands of how many people have actually been to a WeWork?
I have.
All right. Hopefully a lot of members in the crowd.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't been to a WeWork, maybe I'll just give you a couple of minutes on what it is. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. I got asked a lot when I was leaving my former job at Time Warner Cable, why was someone who sort of grew up in the media business leaving to go into the real estate business? And I didn't view myself as sort of going into the real estate business. What I viewed was that what we were doing at WeWork was really what I call adding a programming layer onto real estate. And just, you know, similar in sort of my former job, where we basically built infrastructure for a living, you know, cable. And we had companies who basically helped light up that infrastructure for us. They could be HBO, they could be Netflix, they could be Facebook, et cetera. That's really what we're doing in real estate. We are adding an experience layer that's really never been done. And we're doing it in a way with a community aspect to it and an energy about it that you've seen when you've gone into a WeWork that really has created a lifestyle brand around working. And as we have recently gone into living. And today, you know, we are in close to 30 cities with our WeWorks, and we've just opened up our first 2 WeLives. And WeWork, for those of you who've been there, what you see is not only the energy, the culture of the place, but people actually working together. We have many buildings where half the people in the buildings are doing business with one another in a given month. And that's a very sort of significant change in how people sort of think about coming to work and working, you know, with people who sort of share a common space. And it was only really a natural evolution of that to go into living. And Adam and Miguel, who founded WeWork, really from day one, they always knew they wanted to go into living. They basically viewed it as the natural extension of people will come together and work together, and ultimately people will come together and live together. And you know, not surprisingly, what we're seeing in the 2 WeLives we've opened, they are essentially give people the ability to sort of live above the store, so to speak, which is, you know, something I've heard President Obama refer to. But, you know, we have in those buildings, the first 4 or 5 floors will be WeWorks, and above those will be, you know, WeLive. And, for someone who commutes, an hour each way, sort of outside the city into New York every day, it's a pretty compelling value proposition for people to come into a city, to do it in sort of a seamless way without guarantees. And we provide, the furniture, and we provide the cable, and we provide the linens, and we provide, the community. And that's a very compelling value proposition and human proposition that we're providing to our members.
So do you see it expanding beyond the living above where you work? Do you see the shared economy expanding beyond that? And what we're trying to think about the impact on urban environments, and what does it mean? We talked about the demographic shift of urbanization, people moving into the urban environment, but will we define the urban environment differently in the future, where it could be a hub and spoke approach, where is there an urban part of Los Angeles that's an elevator ride away through Hyperloop that could be 60, 70 miles away that's still connected? Or do you think that the urban environment will be defined differently in the future?
I do, and we spend a lot of time doing postmortems on the WeWorks that we've opened and what has made them successful. And there's a few, characteristics that sort of come back over and over again, but as you can imagine, sort of top of the list is always location. And as it relates to location, it basically relates to access to public transportation is often one that we sort of find is among the most compelling of the value proposition. And so I think, when we look at new buildings to open, it may not necessarily be a part of town that people are in today or where industry is today, but we know that there is an infrastructure plan around that part of town, so to speak, that will be very compelling for us in the future. We just opened in West London, and one of the reasons we made that decision and took that particular building is we know that there is an infrastructure plan around that part of the city that we think over time that's going to be a very compelling location for us.
Do you think there's another demographic shift underway around home ownership? We're seeing a lot of people projecting that car ownership will drop off dramatically through the shared economy. We're seeing right now, since the last recession, we've seen a 600 basis point drop in home ownership as people are more comfortable renting. Yeah. And in your We Live concept, do you think that's a major demographic shift that's underway?
I think it relates to sort of the overall sharing economy and what were some of the factors that helped build the sharing economy. If you're a millennial who's a couple of years out of school today and you sort of compare that to a previous generation, you probably have on a relative basis, a lower salary. You probably have higher student loans. In a prior generation, you would go and you'd sort of work for one or two companies, and one of the things that would be important was, what's their pension plan and how many years of service before I vest. You'd probably own one or two homes, and probably real estate appreciation would be for that in that prior generation one of the significant sort of wealth creators, and that has changed fundamentally. And so as a result, what we're sort of seeing from the people who use WeWork and will use We Live, they're working differently and they're living differently, and I would say they are much more mission driven and focus on what the company is doing. They are very experience driven, and as a result, they don't feel necessarily at times that they have to own a car or they have to own a home. If they can get those experiences with, frankly, not tying up capital and use the sharing economy, frankly, to put money back in their pocket to sort of achieve the experiences they want, I think that's a very good outcome for people.
So, Mayor Garcetti, as you start to think about the changing needs of housing and the changing demographics, the shared economy, Hyperloop, how does it change the policies of your government as it relates to housing and both shared housing and home ownership?
Well, I think you have to be very resistant at one thing changing the world. I mean, to David's point, Uber is adding something. It's not taking over everything. Shared living and shared work is adding something, not changing everything. I'm reminded of that commercial that's out. I forget who it's for, but it's like the guy partying. He's like, I'm never going to get married. Next scene, he's married. He's like, I'm never having kids. Then he has a kid. He's like, I'm never moving out of the city. And then he's in the suburbs and said, I'm never going back. And I think people evolve over time. So you're going to need opportunities for a Hyperloop to transport somebody who wants a backyard and have a place for kids to be in a suburb, but not be stuck an hour and a half on a freeway to get there, as well as the young innovator who wants to be in that environment. And maybe, I don't know if you have any engagements yet in the We Live, it might be too soon, but who might meet his future husband or wife. Right, exactly. I mean, who will bring people together there, and eventually they will find that. So I think policy has to adopt to that and look at not scaring communities, because I think as we move people forward, to Dale's points earlier, you have to be able to meet people where they are. People's fear never comes from a wrong place. It's actually legitimate. You have to confront their fear that if you're going to make an area of town more dense, you have to confront why people are stressed out about that. They're not ideologically against density or for density. Most people are scared about losing something. And if you can kind of make the case as to what we each gain when we produce, let's say, new home ownership opportunities in smaller units that are, condominiums in a city like Los Angeles, where everybody has dreamt of a backyard for a long time, but no matter how you pencil it out, there's not going to be a lot of those opportunities. You can open that opportunity up with small lot subdivisions, which take where a single house used to be and put 8 townhomes on them. When you look at the opportunity to do shared living spaces and change the zoning to accommodate that, when you look at the tax base of different things, you can go very high, and we're still building in this city, for instance, a lot of crappy, like 5-story structures, which the REITs like, which institutional investors like, but don't do much for a neighborhood. And for the pure tax base of what it does for schools, if we went higher and lost our phobia of tall buildings, we'd actually do better for our schools and gain more from it. So I think public policy has to be nimble, and it has to kind of embrace all of them. And to my earlier point, you cannot resist change. You can be passive about it and accept, or even in a nice way, embrace it. But I really think it's incumbent on government to help guide it, because no one company is going to solve a city's needs. No one vision is going to complete the diversity in a town like this, with as much cultural background and ferment and ages and cultural origins. You need to mirror that diversity in the products of transportation, housing, open space, and economy that ultimately will continue to attract everybody and not just a few.
But for us, I talked about we're in close to 30 cities right now. Los Angeles is actually our 3rd largest city after New York City and London. And, the reason we have expanded so quickly in Los Angeles is it has been a city that, has been willing to work with us. And when we sit as a senior team and we plot out, where should we be, we basically look to figure out is the mayor's office, the governor's office, are they thinking about the world? We think about ourselves as product companies. Are they thinking about themselves as product cities, and what products they have in their cities today? What products do they want to bring to their cities? What products are they lacking? And if we can have those types of partnerships, that's what gets us over the hump of sort of moving in to the city, or if we're in a city deciding, we're going to go even deeper into this city. And so if you're not really as a city willing to be innovative, I think ultimately, you leave yourself behind.
It's cities are becoming more innovative, some obviously more innovative than others, but the innovation on the regulatory side moves at different paces. And when I think about the members of the panel here, we have a wide variety of regulatory issues to deal with. And Dale, on the public-private partnership, it's an interesting concept to try to get your head around, because you have such a need for capital in the infrastructure markets, yet there are many states that still don't have P3 legislation, some that have legislation but are resistant politically to it. And I'd be interested in your views of what we can do to better educate our legislators to open the doors to bring that private capital to some of these challenges.
Boy, well, I think I would follow on a thought that the mayor raised, and he's pointing out that a lot of the sentiment is driven by fear. Whether it's fear of the unknown, David deals with it. People are fearful of being put out of work. I think you made clarified the point that you're not a threat to taxi drivers, but they're fearful of that. People are afraid of what they perceive as new technology. And the same way that many government agencies that have become so accustomed to the municipal bond market in the U.S. Are afraid of doing something else. And a lot of decision makers have kind of spent many years honing their ability to go to Washington and seek a grant, or to bring more tax dollars back to their jurisdiction. And that's been the drill for many, many decades. So that people know that drill and fighting for your fair share of tax revenue. When you think about the public-private partnership conversation, it's a much different paradigm. You're thinking about what service you're trying to deliver to the public, hopefully more quickly and more efficiently, with less risk to the public sector and much more price certainty and time certainty. But yet there's fear of the unknown, whether it's some public unions that are fearful of being put out of work if they think the private sector is going to do something they're doing. There are many public officials, professionals who are fearful of testing out a model that hasn't been well tested in the U.S. in the way that we're doing it, and they're fearful of the public flogging that you sometimes experience before a city council or a state legislature or Congress.
That doesn't exist anymore. That's over. That
You've successfully eradicated the flogging. But the point is, I think that so we've gotten our minds around the fear of the unknown, and I think I spoke earlier to the issue of leadership, and this is where I see the leadership so important, not only to flip the fear over and help people see the opportunity that awaits us if we can simply get some major decisions made, but there's a lot of parallels in the market that we're dealing with, where you now after maybe 8 or 10 years of effort, have the majority of states that authorize public-private partnerships, local jurisdictions finding the authority in their charters and moving forward. And I think when you think of automated vehicles, for example, there's something fewer than 15 states or so about that have some sort of regulatory regime. The federal government's trying to figure it out. They haven't even gotten to you yet, right, in terms of what are you and who regulates you and how that's going to be done. So, the process is built for incrementalism, and it's built to be slow and methodical. I would argue that when you have a growing bench of innovative leaders who are taking seats of power and influence today, that now would be the time to argue for a more radical shift in the way that we think of regulation, to unleash the innovation that is currently available to us today. And sure, there's some fear in there, but I think there's ways to manage that. But I would argue that we need to modernize the regulatory system, the financing and funding systems, in order to at least, we'll never keep pace with the pace of innovation that you see in the private sector, but we can do much more, I think, to unleash the innovative capacity that we currently have pent up here.
Great, thank you, Dale. A question just for the general panel here. We got a couple minutes left, and as I thought about pulling this panel together, we were thinking about how many different panelists could we have, and there was probably a few more that we could have had on the stage but didn't have time for. But I'd be interested in the thoughts of any of the panelists. What are we missing on the stage here? What other innovators, what other financing sources, what other people do we need on this stage to create the future city of Los Angeles and any other city?
We probably need some women, and I'm glad that we, in the city of Los Angeles, have 50% of our commissioners are now women. I love what Justin Trudeau said when he put a cabinet together that was half women. And they asked why, and he said, because it's 2016. But I actually think, in terms of what we've covered, we have a pretty complete group up here. I think what Dale said is right. What we're missing is not the voices so much here. I think government has to be younger, and companies need to be older or act older. Companies need to grow up, and governments need to act younger. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is right now, if you think the public sector employee leaders inherently are conservative, keep your head down, don't screw things up, and you might get to the next level. Companies, it's the opposite. You got to throw everything in, do something differently. There's so many people competing. You have to act young, and then the future will take care of itself if we can just get there. I mean, Uber is like this huge risk, right? And the valuations that you guys have could crumble tomorrow. Who knows what would happen? But it's the companies who realize, hey, at a certain point, I don't have all the answers, and I got to listen. What are we going to do? Figure out background checks together like we're working through. How are we going to make sure that people actually have options for housing together? Let's make sure people don't die in the prototypes that we have. But at the same time, government needs to start thinking about itself. Like, if we don't take those risks, governments, even though we have a monopoly, won't die, but another place will get it first. And every time I've taken those risks, I've been rewarded. Whether it's going to the cloud with our email systems, which, when we did that 8 years ago, the first big city, it was like the most radical thing, and now people are like, huh? Like, all our emails in the cloud. Or you embrace, the ability, like, I want to be the first with Hyperloop in a major American city. Each time there's always been a reward. Don't wait for another city to figure it out and chase them, because you're not going to be part of writing that book. Vice versa with the companies. Don't wait to talk with governments, because otherwise they know how to dig in their heels and act really old.
Yeah, I think the challenge, just to build on what Dale and Margaret talked about. So, with Uber and our competitors in the ride-sharing space, the debate was very difficult in the beginning, because it was, well, we have these regulations for taxi and for-hire vehicles, and well, if you fit in there, everything's fine. That's not a very satisfying conversation. So what's happened around the world is new laws. But what's interesting is you think about, like, just in our case, I think one of the challenges for government is they have to review their regulations almost every 6 months, because things are fast. So we are dealing with cities around the world who've had regulations on the books for 50 years. And in our case, what did that mean? What's one thing everybody in the world can do? Drive. We were severely limiting the number of people who could make money doing something all of us can do. And secondly, because we were restricting the supply, we were forcing people into car ownership, particularly low-income people. So it's fascinating. And, government has to deal with a lot of crisis. You're trying to enact your agenda. It's hard. But things are moving so quickly. But I do think, so in our case, to your point, Dale, most of the discussion around a company like ours, how do we deal with the regulations? The really interesting discussion is, how do we help mobility?
Yeah.
How do we help grow the economy? And too much of the debate is just focused on the regulation and not on what comes after that.
Nice.
David, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to all the panelists here. It's an honor to be on the panel here with such great innovators and thinkers. Thank you, all of you, for your comments, and thank you all for participating today and listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Great job.